News Alert as we begin Outnumbered Overtime right now with a live picture of the President of the United States. He has just arrived on Air Force One to Salt Lake City, Utah. This was a planned trip where he is joined by Senator Mike Lee of Utah and also other dignitaries from the government on this issue. We know that as he was exiting, President Obama irritated Utah Republicans, this according to the Associated Press, by creating the Bears Ears National Monument on 1.35 million acres of land sacred to Native Americans and home to thousands of archaeological sites. Should that have happened that way, the president may sign an executive order. Or take some steps to rectify what had happened there with the Antiquities Act. And the importance of that is something that Republicans have wanted to do. They want to make sure that there is a match between the land that is set aside for a monument and that it is not an overreach in terms of how much land is actually needed. The president is able to upend the protections under the 1906 Antiquities Act, which gives him broad authority to declare federal lands as monuments and restrict their use or reverse that. So the president is said to be taking a look at this issue as he's in Salt Lake City. Now, there are a lot of other things going on with government right now, and there will be reporters along the route. We don't know what that will look like in terms of access, but we can tell you that this president, sometimes even in instances like this, so we are mining the microphones right now, will take questions on other issues. We know that tax reform is being debated right now in conference committee between the Senate and the House versions of that bill to try to get something on this president's desk with tax reform in mind before Christmas. We know that a government shutdown is going to try to be avoided, although it will be a showdown between now and Friday and a deadline to keep the government running based on a spending bill that they have to at least start to make motion on. But right now, the president is in Salt Lake City, Utah. And he is set, as I mentioned, to potentially talk about issues that are important to people who live in Utah and their lawmakers. If we can, let's listen in and see if there is any audio at this point. So we are watching as we kind of let the moment breathe here with the microphones open. Sometimes you can hear some of the chatter that's going back and forth. The president is announcing, we are told, anticipating him to announce plans to scale back 2 sprawling national monuments in Utah, responding to what he has condemned as a, quote, massive federal land grab by the government. And of course, that happened under President Obama. The president is traveling there to outline his intention to shrink that and to address the concerns of local lawmakers there. And you see him working what we like to call as a receiving line on the tarmac there. He had motioned to get into the car at that point, but then pulled back. You see family members there, others from Utah who are, it looks like, selfie taking, so on and so forth. It is a big deal, obviously, when the president comes. But again, an opportunity, if reporters ask him on the ground, to talk about some big issues that are making news right now. One of them, of course, one that the president went to Capitol Hill on last week, and that is tax reform. It's something he wants to get as a huge legislative agenda, possibly before Christmas. So we are watching this as he makes news on this trip. You see Senator Orrin Hatch turn toward the camera for just a second there, and now he's turned back. So you have a lot of the dignitaries and leadership there in Utah. As again, we get highlights from his comments on the ground. We'll bring them to you live. The president in Utah right now. And this Fox News Alert also dealing with the president. He's ripped into the FBI in the wake of his former national security advisor's guilty plea and following the revelation that Robert Mueller, in charge of that investigation, reassigned a top FBI agent over some anti-Trump text messages. Let's go Outnumbered Overtime. I'm Harris Faulkner. President Trump defending General Michael Flynn for lying to the FBI by bashing his 2016 opponent, Hillary Clinton, claiming she did the same thing and suggesting that Flynn is being held to a higher standard. And that's not all. The president not holding back after reports broke over the weekend that special counsel Robert Mueller removed a top FBI agent from the Russia investigation over some anti-Trump text messages, which I mentioned. That same investigator, interesting, played a key role in the probe into Hillary Clinton's emails. Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge now joins us live from Washington. So, Catherine, this looks messy. Was there bias against the president with this FBI agent with regard to any of the investigations he worked on?
Well, let's just lay out for folks at home how central this FBI agent Peter Strzok was to the Clinton email case as well as the Russia case. Harris, he was there on the ground floor in 2015 when the Intelligence Community Inspector General referred the Clinton email case to the FBI because classified information had been found on that unsecured personal server. He also weighed in on the decision as to whether criminal charges should be pursued in the Clinton email case. And according to published reports, he was the one who insisted on finding intent, even though the gross negligence statute does not require intent. He was also part of that email chain that helped draft the so-called exoneration statement. That was the statement in July by then FBI Director James Comey, and it was drafted 2 months before Hillary Clinton was even interviewed. This same FBI agent was also part of the review of Huma Abedin and Anthony Weiner's emails. That's when classified information was found just before the election and caused the case to be reopened and then shut within a matter of days, Harris. So he is right there at the sweet spot of the email investigation.
Yeah, so then I have to ask, does this shake any way, shape, or form how that turned out, that investigation? I mean, if he's at the core of it and the core is something that is, looks corrupted or at least compromised, what does that mean?
Well, I think we also want to see this in the context of his role in the Russia case, because he was also a central player in that case. So in July of 2016, when the FBI Director James Comey for the first time shuts the Clinton email case, they then open this counterintelligence probe about Russia. And this same FBI agent, Peter Strzok, he's, if not the senior supervisor, one of the senior supervisors on that case. He's also one of the key handlers for the anti-Trump dossier, and also this British spy, Christopher Steele, the one who did the opposition research for the dossier that was funded by the DNC as well as the Clinton campaign. And then that brings us to the allegation that he shared these anti-Trump texts with this lawyer at the FBI. So this is the subject of an inspector general's investigation, and they're going to be looking at whether any of this shaped the way in which he handled these cases, Harris.
Wow. The greater American public has to be looking at this and wondering, the trust is being shaken now with a major agency within the government, the FBI. I'm curious, is the FBI working to assure that there are no others on the FBI team with this kind of bias?
Well, one of the things to watch this week is that after our colleague James Rosen broke this story on the weekend, the Justice Department moved very quickly to say they were going to provide records and individuals to the House Intelligence Committee on the dossier and other related issues. And based on our reporting, we believe as early as Thursday this week, they could get as one of the witnesses either this FBI agent or the Deputy Attorney General, that's a promotion, Deputy at the FBI, Andrew McCabe. Andrew McCabe has his own issues here, which has been the subject of an independent investigation over his wife's contributions from Terry McAuliffe and this DNC PAC during her state Senate race in 2015. So you got two key players here. They were both on the emails when Comey was drafting the exoneration statement from Clinton, and the allegation is that they had a bias in this case, and a bias that was very much in favor of Mrs. Clinton and not then candidate Trump Harris.
Look, I asked you if the FBI could make any assurances. I don't even know if that's possible at this point. I mean, it's a lot when you talk about all the details that you just gave us to assure that there are no others like that. Catherine Herridge, good to see you. Thank you very much for bringing us the facts on this. Let's bring in Chief Political Anchor and Anchor of Special Report, Bret Baier. Bret, always good to see you. One of the things that kind of pops in all of this is the reaction, not just in Capitol Hill, but around the country. I mean, do voters look at this? What is the takeaway for Americans?
Harris, good afternoon. I think, listen, first of all, you need a scorecard for all this. You need, it's like pieces of a quilt, and you have to put it all together so you explain it. And it's not easy. It doesn't fit on a bumper sticker. But bottom line is you have questions about people who are part of this investigation, at integral parts of this investigation, the Hillary Clinton investigation, and also as you develop into the Russia investigation and this dossier. You have Congressman Peter King, for example, saying all of this casts a shadow over the investigation. Now, that's not analysis of it, that is a lawmaker who's definitely up on the facts. He's a Republican, but one that usually is a straight shooter. I think there are others up on Capitol Hill who are looking into this seriously and say, this is another element that should not be forgotten as we talk about all the different bullet points with this Russia investigation.
All right. And Brett, I want to focus basically now on what the president needs to do going forward with all of this.
Well, I think there are different points of view inside the White House. I think for his lawyers, his legal team, I bet they would like him to stop tweeting about it. I bet they would like him to stop engaging on the investigation. You saw Senator Lindsey Graham saying, you tweet about this investigation at your own peril over the weekend. And it opens a door every time there is one of these tweets. Now, we saw what happened with the one tweet on when Flynn lied, whether to the White House or the FBI, and the analysis of that, and then one of his attorneys stepping up saying that he's the one who phrased it like that before it was tweeted out. It's dangerous times because you're dealing with an investigation that is ongoing, that is, potentially looking at a number of different people.
We've got Ari Fleischer standing by to talk about the tweeting going on from the president and his attorney in a moment. But I caught a little bit of news on the 5th annual Reagan National Defense Forum this weekend at the Reagan Presidential Library in California. I was watching you moderated. Oh, good. We have the video of this. Brett, I know you asked CIA Director Mike Pompeo about the way the president gets his intelligence, and you talked with him about some other things. We've got a little bit of that, and then I want to get your response.
We deliver him the set of things he needs to know that happened overnight, a set of things that we think are important to him to know in the weeks ahead if he's traveling or he's got someone coming to visit that we need to make sure he's fully briefed on. And then we use a portion of that time to share with him things that we believe are strategically important so that we can begin to plan our intelligent laydown for the months and years ahead. He asks lots of hard questions, as any good intelligence consumer would.
So when you hear these stories or see these stories that he's losing it, or that he's not with it, or that he's totally checked out, what do you think?
It's absurd. I'll put it in Washington terms. It's demonstrably false.
That's funny.
Yeah, I tell you, it was a great event. There were a lot of nuggets. That was just give you a context of the CIA Director Pompeo, but there were substantive things about. You have the National Security Advisor saying how close we are to moving closer to every day towards military action against North Korea. You had Pompeo say that he sent a letter to the head of the Quds Force, the Revolutionary Guard in Iran, to say if you go after or engage U.S. and Iraqi troops directly and continue what you're doing, we will not let that stand. So there were really interesting things as it was the panels continued.
All right, a great opportunity for that conversation. Glad we could bring it to our Overtime viewers today. Brett Behar, we'll see you at 6 p.m. with special report, 6 p.m. Eastern. Don't miss it. I never do.
Thanks, Harris.
Great to see you. Ari Fleischer is here now, former White House press secretary under George W. Bush, and a Fox News contributor as well. So why is the attorney writing the president's tweets?
Yeah, well, it doesn't surprise me if the president has staff helping out with things. But in this case, I just have to question the colossal mistake of judgment. The thing about Twitter, and especially if you're the president, you do not have to tweet every thought that's in your head. Sometimes it's best just to go slow and pass it by.
Is there anybody in his inner circle, though, do you think? I mean, clearly not this attorney, because he was tweeting for him, or not tweeting for him, but writing the material. No, who can make that point? When you have, a president who talks directly to the American people. I've seen people fire back and say, the president just talked to me. That is huge for the American public.
Look, there's a benefit to Twitter, and the president should use it well, and he should use it wisely. But it's the incorrect uses that are going to define him. And here's the problem, Harris. When you look at this presidency in its totality, there is so much substantively good things going on. If this was a football game, he is moving the ball 10, 15 yards down the field based on the economy, based on tax reform, based on the stock market, low unemployment. But at the same time, he keeps getting flagged for illegal motion, for false starts, problems that are his own creation because of the tweets, and therefore he loses the yardage he's gaining. He's getting defined by his Twitter behavior instead of the substance of the country and the substance of the economy. That's a mistake.
Ari, would you just allow me, because this is video from moments ago. We were showing people this live as it was happening. You see the president, Senator Orrin Latch. You see Senator Mike Lee. These are lawmakers in Utah who are accompanying the president because, and again, this is moments ago. We've already seen him come down and on the tarmac, but we're going to re-show you these pictures because we didn't actually see him come off of Air Force One as we're speaking. And this is also a good example of just showing all the other things that the president has on his plate right now. And, you know, Senator Lindsey Graham says that when the president tweets, he could be wading into peril.
Well, that's my point. There was so much good going on. It's the mistaken tweets that are causing him all the consternation, all the problems. And again, back to that football analogy. If you move the ball down 10 yards down the field, but you end up losing 10 yards because you made a mistake, you never gained those yards. And that's what scares me about this presidency. This economy may come booming back. Unemployment may stay low and wages may rise. But if Donald Trump doesn't become more popular and grow from his base, he'll never get credit. He's just got. If Donald Trump stop it with the tweets, if the White House is listening, you really do need now to tone this down, especially with the legal investigation that's underway.
Yeah, I bet that's not the first time that they've heard that, though, right? And again, I come back to the fact that you have a president who, with millions and millions and millions of followers, is able to talk directly. Is there a happy medium, perhaps, a happy medium?
Well, the medium is to do it right, to do it well, and to not take advantage of every opportunity to do it, especially on the legal issues.
That attorney, I mean, it doesn't ding the attorney. All respect to him, nobody knows him. They know the president and that it was the president's account. Last thought.
Look, Harris, I'm not smart enough and I'm not a lawyer to know if that substantively will or won't hurt him with the Mueller investigation.
I just mean in terms of it was a mistake on Twitter.
Yeah, of course it was a mistake on Twitter. Take no risks. When you're under a legal investigation and you're the president, take no risks. Donald Trump's a risk taker. And he always has been. It worked for him. He won the presidency. But I wish that he wouldn't in this case. He's only hurting a cause that really is a good one because he's making so much progress on the economy.
Yeah, and nothing really in your past history with President Bush or any other president that was the equivalent that we've seen with social media. Real quick.
No, social media is new for everybody in that sense. And it's a tremendous opportunity for politicians to use it well and to use it wisely. In the legal issues, I wouldn't use it at all.
All right. Ari Fleischer, always good to see you back up in the mezzanine, feeling mezzanine today on Overtime.
Mezzanine. I think that's what I'll have for lunch.
Yeah, hashtag. Thank you. You're funny. House lawmakers are now back on Capitol Hill, getting to work on tax reform after the Senate passed its own version. Can both chambers of Congress find common ground to get a bill to the president's desk? Not just get it there, but get it there by Christmas. By the way, that's not all they're dealing with. As I mentioned, with the president on the ground in Utah, reporters could ask about a whole bunch of stuff, including passing a separate spending bill or facing a government shutdown. We will talk with one congressman about the chances of tax reform passing, keeping the government open, and so much more. Stay close. Fox News alert, Republican House members are returning to Washington today, a day earlier than they had planned to hash out a final tax bill with the Senate. The GOP is sounding confident they will get a final bill to the president's desk by Christmas. But right now, they're facing a Friday deadline on something else. Passing a separate spending measure to avoid a government shutdown. Democrats are threatening to vote against that spending bill if it is not tied to immigration legislation. Let's bring in Congressman Luke Messer, a Republican from Indiana. He's a member of the House Financial Services Committee and the chairman of the Republican Policy Committee. So good to have you on the program today. First of all, I just want to tap in with you and tell us where the conversation is this week ahead of Friday.
Well, look, this is an incredible opportunity. After decades of broken promises, we have an opportunity to deliver on tax reform, bigger paychecks, more jobs, a fairer, simpler tax code. You know, I was thinking about it coming into town. The last time there was major tax reform, I was playing a middle linebacker for the Greensburg Pirates, my high school football team. And so it's a big day and a big opportunity and a lot of momentum this week.
All right, this just in. I get to get your thoughts on this, Congressman Messer. We are learning that Chuck Schumer, Senator Chuck Schumer, and Nancy Pelosi of the House have just agreed potentially to come back and meet with the president. Remember how they walked away last week? Quote, "We're glad the White House has reached out and asked for a second meeting. We hope the president will go into this meeting with an open mind rather than deciding that an agreement cannot be reached beforehand." Again, this is on avoiding a government shutdown, deadline Friday. You get to comment first on Pelosi and Chuck Schumer possibly coming back to the table.
Well, of course they should meet with the President of the United States. I could never imagine turning down a meeting with the President of the United States over something as important as keeping our government open. They, of course, last week showed how political this whole process has been. It's a manufactured crisis. The question about what we're going to do with the DACA, it doesn't have to be solved until March, and it's a manufactured crisis to try to tie it to spending here at the end of the year.
All right, let's talk again about tax reform, though, because that's where we are. We've got members in the House who've come back early. Are you back with the idea that once you're in conference committee, there are only a couple of things to work out? And what would those big things be at this point?
Well, look, the details of this tax plan will matter, but the details are there's a lot more similar in these plans than there are differences. I think the most important priority is delivering tax cuts for working people in America, making sure that middle-class families get a tax break. That's what this plan's all about. We also need to modernize our business taxes and help create taxes or lower taxes for job creators, because that's the best way to drive up the job opportunities and to create higher wages. But one way or another, we're going to get this done. You know, I've been incredibly excited to see President Trump's leadership on this issue. I think here in the next couple of weeks, we get a chance to deliver on one of President Trump's biggest campaign promises.
Before I let you go real quickly, I want to talk about the $1 trillion or more debt point that this puts forth and what the messaging is inside the House and the Senate for Republicans, because that's an issue where Americans look and they think, okay, conservatives, Republicans, sure, they have our back on not making more debt. Your thought?
The best way to balance our budget and pay down the debt is to have a growing economy. The only time in modern history where we've actually paid down the debt and reduced deficits is in the 1990s when we had 4% growth. We're on the verge of that now. The stock market's up. We've got low unemployment. If we could get real wage growth, which I think comes from this tax plan, we'll have an opportunity to actually pay down the debt. That's what history has shown, and we can do it again.
20, 22%, 23% in terms of that corporate tax cut is being kind of bandied around now rather than a hard and fast 20%. Does it matter, and what is the takeaway?
Yeah, I think we want to get that rate as low as we can, but I also think we need to get this tax relief out right away. So what I'm hoping is that we can get as much tax relief into this year as possible, and if having that number a little higher allows us to do that, that would be a smart policy. Look, in the end, what matters is we cut taxes for working Americans, we modernize this tax code, and we keep this economy moving. This is a great opportunity. We just need to get it done.
All right. From the great state of Indiana, Congressman Luke Messer.
It's a great state.
I know. I drove through it. I loved every second. Went from Minnesota to New York. I wanted to stay. Thank you.
That's fabulous. Thanks.
Good to see you. The Supreme Court is set to hear a case that could have a far-reaching impact on religious freedom and speech right here in USA. What is at stake? Plus, digging into the case Robert Mueller brought against Michael Flynn, prominent legal mind Alan Dershowitz says Flynn's guilty plea shows the prosecution's weakness. He's going to come back to the program and tell us why. The continuing fallout now from Michael Flynn pleading guilty to lying to the FBI. Critics of the Trump White House are calling it a significant development in Robert Mueller's investigation into Russian meddling and possible collusion. But our next guest says it's a show of weakness by Mueller. Alan Dershowitz is a Harvard Law professor emeritus and the author of Trumped Up and joins us via Skype. Now, you joined me on Friday, and we were talking about this last week as Michael Flynn was getting ready to cut a deal, and now we know he has. You had some dramatic things, though, to say about where President Trump is in all this and how some are maybe doing an overreach.
I think that's right. I think too many people are elevating hope over reality, people who want to see the president go down. But this is not a show of strength. If Flynn had very strong material against the president would have pardoned him. The president allowed him to make a deal with the special counsel. And the deal is not a particularly good one for the special counsel because he had to indict him for lying. that makes him a worthless witness. Any criminal defense attorney can destroy him on the witness stand. Just say, this is a guy who's already admitted lying. He's doing this to save his son and himself. He's not only singing, he's composing. He's making up stories or exaggerating stories in order to give the prosecution what he wants. So I don't see this as a show of strength. The show of strength would have been indicting him for a conspiracy that included other people. But indicting him for lying to the FBI about something that wasn't itself a crime doesn't, to me, show that the prosecution at this point is on very strong ground.
You know, it's interesting because when you couple, and I'm not saying that these things are necessarily related, but I've been saying this, I said it on Outnumbered too, when you couple the fact that you find out that there is a member of Mueller's team, a member at the FBI, who is sending out anti-Trump text messages, and you start to look at the texture of things that are going on in that agency, does that trouble you?
Of course it troubles me, but Mueller is a decent man, and he did fire him when he found out about it. Look, I don't think Mueller is going to do anything that is unethical or illegal. He may stretch, and he's already stretched the law, and he has played the game of dominoes. You pick the low-hanging fruit, you indict them on relatively minor charges unrelated to the major inquiry, and you hope that they will be able to be squeezed and turn against higher-ups. But at this point, I don't see very much coming out of that. Dianne Feinstein, the senator from California, was dead wrong when she said you can charge a president with obstruction of justice for firing the director of the FBI. It's my view as a matter of constitutional law that you cannot charge the president with obstruction of justice if he only exercises his constitutional authority. And he clearly has constitutional authority to fire Mueller. And even to tell the FBI what to investigate, what not to investigate. That's all within the authority of the president. The reason that Nixon got charged is because he went well beyond that. And he paid hush money to witnesses. He destroyed evidence. He told his people to lie to the FBI. We've never seen a president charged with obstruction of justice merely for exercising his constitutional authority. And that would create a great conflict between the branches of government, particularly if Congress went after him for acting under his constitutional authority.
All right, before I let you go, a real basic question, and it goes to the trust that the American people may or may not have at this point in the FBI because of some of the more political moves and some of the things that we're finding out that went on with this person that Mueller has fired now, with the anti-Trump tweets, so on and so forth. Is it time for the president to do something different with regard to Mueller? And if he made that decision, what would happen?
I don't think it is. I think if you're innocent, Mueller is a good person to be conducting the investigation because he's less political and less partisan. He's very zealous, perhaps overzealous. I think it would be a terrible mistake for the president to, at this point, try to fire Mueller. He'd have to get the deputy attorney general to do it. He probably wouldn't do it. He'd then have to fire the deputy attorney general. And we'd be in Nixon land, the Saturday Night Massacre. I think he's much better off cooperating. I don't think he is vulnerable. What Flynn lied about was not a crime. He lied about trying to get the Russians. And so I think he should just continue to do what he's been doing.
I want to make it clear that was my own question. Nobody is suggesting that. But when you look at just the texture of things that have gone on with the bias that's now being hinted at as he had to fire the person over those anti-Trump tweets, and then now, as you put it, Mueller kind of stretching the law, but not going beyond and potentially having a very weak case at this point. Still no evidence of collusion. Go ahead, last word.
I think he would. I think the president would only strengthen Mueller's hand if he tried to fire him. Remember, collusion is not a crime. It's only a conspiracy to commit a crime that becomes criminal, and there's just no evidence of that at this point in time.
Alan Dershowitz, thank you very much for your expertise. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
The Supreme Court is set to hear a high-profile case tomorrow, pitting free speech and religious rights against same-sex equality. This after a Colorado baker refused to make a wedding cake for a gay couple. He claims baking that cake would support something that goes against his religion and says his First Amendment rights allowed him to turn their business away. And as for that couple, they argue discrimination, setting up what will mark the first full-scale test of gay rights since the Supreme Court legalized same-sex weddings nationwide 2 years ago. Joining me now is John Corvino, professor of philosophy at Wayne State University. Also here is Ryan T. Anderson, senior research fellow at the Heritage Foundation. They are both co-authors co-authors of the book Debating Religious Liberty and Discrimination. And there are a lot of young people across America who've seen you guys on stage go at it. And of course, they're reading your writings rather. So thank you for being here, gentlemen. Ryan, I want to go to you first. What essentially at the very center is this case about?
Sure. This case is about whether or not the government can force a creative professional to express a message that he disagrees with. In this case, it centers on how he believes what marriage is, but it could be about any belief. And the question is, can the state force a creative professional to express a message that he disagrees with? And the answer is no. The Constitution doesn't allow the states to do this.
John, you say the baker was wrong. Why?
Well, I don't think this is about the government forcing anybody to send any message, but about whether religious freedom or freedom of speech gives people a license to discriminate. And I think one way to understand the case is to look at another case where the Supreme Court considered whether the First Amendment gives exemptions to anti-discrimination law. It's different in a number of ways, but there are important similarities. Back in the 1960s, Maurice Bessinger did not want to serve African Americans at his barbecue joints, Piggy Park Barbecue. Now, he said he was happy to serve them takeout, but that, was a bridge too far for him to allow interracial dining. And he cited his First Amendment free speech rights, his religious liberty rights. Suppose we were to update that case and say, Maurice Bessinger is alive now, he wants to operate a bakery, and he says, you know what, I'll let all kinds of people come into my bakery, black, white, all different people, but interracial marriage is still a bridge too far for me, and I don't want to allow, use my creative expression to support this message of support for interracial marriage.
I think we'd say he
ought to lose that case, and for the same reason, Jack Phillips ought to lose this case.
Yeah, but Ryan, you're saying that you don't anticipate that they will lose this case. Why not?
No, I mean, the Supreme Court has ruled twice within the past 20 years that the First Amendment protects a free exercise, a free speech right against speaking a message where you disagree, even in the context of LGBT rights. There are two Supreme Court cases right on point where there was a sexual orientation non-discrimination law. The states said someone had to endorse expression with which they disagreed, and then the Supreme Court reversed. The Supreme Court said you can't do that, states. People have a First Amendment free speech right not to speak messages with which they disagree. John's just wrong about the case law here.
John?
I think there's a really important difference with the cases that Ryan mentioned, which is that neither of those have to do with public accommodations. That's one thing I want to say. Another thing
They were both public accommodations law.
But were we talking about a business open to the public?
One was a parade, and the other case was the Boy Scouts. But it was both public accommodation
right, of course.
statute.
Yeah, I'm
very
familiar with both of those cases, but parades...
We're going to run out of time here, and I just want to step in here real quickly, because I know you guys have gone back and forth about this one issue, this baker in Colorado, and the Supreme Court. Where do you see this falling down real quickly? John, you first.
Well, I want to say that in cases where we're talking about expressing a message, like a parade, that's one thing. This is a public business. And as the American Unity Fund brief said, nobody looks at a wedding cake and says, the baker has endorsed this union. We're stretching the notion of speech if we treat this as a First Amendment case, which is weird for people, social conservatives, who say we want to interpret the Constitution strictly, and yet they're treating cakes as free speech.
Ryan, last word.
Sure, the court has said repeatedly that art counts as speech. What we need to do in America is find a way to agree to disagree about gay marriage. If you're in favor of same-sex marriage, you can be free to live that out. But if you're not in favor of it, you need to also be free not to be forced to express support for it.
All right,
it needs to be a two-way street.
John Trevino, Ryan Anderson, thank you both very much. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having us.
And of course, we'll follow the news on this as it happens. Still to come, North Korea is calling out the United States, why the rogue regime says the U.S. is begging for nuclear war. Ambassador John Bolton returns from Outnumbered next. New details now. The U.S. and South Korea have kicked off a massive show of force while taking part in war drills, all in the wake of North Korea test firing their most powerful missile ever. Of course, we know that happened last week, that ICBM. North Korea is also calling out President Trump, saying that the U.S. would be held responsible if the world, quote, is embroiled in the crucible of nuclear war, end quote. Back from the Outnumbered show is Ambassador John Bolton here. They use words like crucible and so on over there. But what does it all mean? I mean, you have told me this comes down to a binary choice. Are we actually there now?
I think we're almost certainly there, unless there's some some dramatic development from China. North Korea is not going to back away. It's so close to the finish line now after 25 years of effort. It's determined to cross it. We know the president raised this point with Xi Jinping in his visit to Beijing. There's no evidence the Chinese have changed anything yet. So if the president sticks with what he said at the UN, which is denuclearization is the only way forward with North Korea, and I think that's the correct policy, military force follows.
You know, it's been a couple decades ago, but and maybe it's happened since and I wasn't aware of it, but China has turned off energy for North Korea in the past and brought them to they've capitulated quickly, brought them to the table. Why don't they do that now?
Well, there's some question exactly what China did in the past, but the reality is that China does supply over 90% of North Korea's energy needs, large amounts of food and other humanitarian supplies, and that's why China does have it within its power either to bring the regime down and reunify the peninsula or put in its own puppet. They have not done that. Over 25 years of saying they don't want North Korea to have nuclear weapons, they have not exercised the leverage they uniquely have.
Do we know where the president wants to go on this?
Well, I don't think we do. I don't think he's made a final decision. I think any use of force is going to take an enormous amount of preparation. Lindsey Graham said yesterday, I've been saying it for a couple months, we ought to order the departure of all civilian dependents from our military forces in South Korea. We ought to order the departure of families of U.S. embassy personnel. We ought to issue a travel warning.
Is that a signal or a necessity out of safety? Like, what is the diplomatic point of doing that?
Inevitably, it's a signal, but you want to keep your people safe, so it's a signal you should be willing to send, yes.
All right, millions of people. I mean, you've got Seoul, just densely populated, within the reach. I mean, I know that they can reach the U.S. mainland, but it's easier to reach those things that are closer to North Korea.
Yeah, well, I don't think they can reach the U.S. mainland yet with nuclear weapons, and that's why the decision time,
testing is what I'm talking about.
Yeah, the decision time is very close, and I think it's our responsibility if we use preemptive force against the nuclear program to do everything we can to destroy that North Korean capacity to harm South Koreans. But let's also be clear: the responsibility of the President of the United States is to protect Americans. And that's ultimately what it has to come down to.
All right, drop the mic. Last word. Ambassador, thank you.
Thank you,
Harris. See you. President Trump officially signaled he's backing Alabama Senate candidate Roy Moore ahead of next week's special election. Our power panel is next. Talk about the political risks and rewards of that. Stay close.